Meet Marvel Snap's newest card, Bastion. Bastion is a 4/3 with an on-reveal ability that adds copies of the cards at the location you play him to your hand, and then sets those cards to 2 cost and 3 power. There are a couple very straightforward synergies that Bastion is going to look to take advantage of with his pseudo sentinels. The cards Bastion creates do count as created by Bastion. So what you can do is get something that has a very powerful effect, effectively discount it to 2 with Bastion, and then use Quinjet to effectively discount it to 1. But the real question when you talk about Bastion is, what is it exactly that we're going to be copying? Victoria Hand seems like a pretty obvious choice. You want to have a deck full of cards that are good things to copy. Bastion can give you targets for your Victoria Hand, but most importantly, he can copy Victoria Hand. And we all know just how powerful it can be to play Victoria Hand and Frigga. Now you have a further force multiplier. Imagine playing a Victoria Hand, bastioning the Victoria Hand on 4, and then on 5, playing bastioned Victoria Hand and then friggaing that. Very easy route to getting 3 Victoria Hands and just overwhelming what your opponent has to offer. Even when he's not doing that in a Victoria Hand shell, he can do things like copy the hood and get you other versions of the hood, albeit at 2/3, but a 2/3 version of the hood would be an incredibly powerful card. Generally, what he's going to do for Victoria Hand is amplify their best draws, where they are just looping Victoria Hands, and also drag upwards some of their middling draws, where maybe you draw Victoria Hand too late to reasonably copy, so what you're really looking for is a large volume of cards to play alongside her. He can make that happen too. Let's take a look at what this might look like. This is my theory-crafted list for the version of Victoria Hand that will feature Bastion, and I think this is a fairly minimal investment into Bastion. The idea here is just keep the deck doing what it likes to do. Use Bastion as a sort of upgrade to Moon Girl that really intensifies your good draws, but even when you're not doing amazing things with him, you should still be able to get some reasonably decent bodies on the back end. There are not a million amazing targets here, but you can get pretty crazy with Quinjet stuff when you have access to Bastion. So between the discounts and the buffs that we have access to in this deck, there should be a lot of points on the board in basically every game that we play. A card that sticks out to me as potentially really interesting with Bastion is Captain Carter. I don't know if it's going to be an exact fit because it can get a little bit clunky, but the idea of a 2/3 Captain Carter just chilling in my hand is really, really powerful. This deck is overlapping with Moonstone and a couple of other things. The idea here is Moonstone Captain Carter is unbelievably powerful. Moonstone Victoria Hand can be quite ridiculous in its own right, and this gives Bastion multiple possible powerful hits at the cost of some of the interactive and cheap cards that the other V-Hand lists get to play. Most importantly, losing out on stuff like Misery does mean that you can have draws that are just a little bit iffy. But the real upside of Bastion is realized when you get 2/3 Victoria Hand buffable versions of Captain Carters. That is an extremely powerful play. But don't worry, that's not all Bastion's doing. I'm very sure that there are people who have been waiting for me to talk about this deck through the entire runtime of this video. This is, of course, Cerebro 3. Bastion is a force multiplier for Cerebro 3, such that it has basically never had access to before. Current builds of Cerebro 3 are leaning into a Madam Web, Ghost Spider, and of course multiple man package in order to hit point thresholds relevant to the current metagame. I'm not sure that's going to be necessary once you can do the kind of stuff that Bastion allows you to do. This is an absurd card if you can hit it onto a Cerebro. There is really no two ways about it. You play a Cerebro, you Bastion the Cerebro, suddenly you are absolutely in business. Now, this is a little bit telegraphed, but luckily, as a Cerebro deck, if you're able to take priority, which with an early Cerebro you likely are, you might be able to do something like play a 2-3 Cerebro on turn 5 alongside a Cosmo to protect the lane you've invested the Cerebros in. This is going to win games. I'm not positive it ends up being the best version of Cerebro 3. There are a lot of good versions of this deck, but that specific playline that I just talked about is going to win games. Bastion has some notable similarities with the kind of cards that have taken on a greater prominence in recent issues of the Marvel Snap metagame. Now, what I mean by that is there are a lot of really strong cards that are really strong by virtue of copying something. Although Bastion is not going to be as easy to break as those cards. The key thing about something like Frigga is that when it copies something, it copies its cost, then it copies its power. Bastion is not doing that, so he has to work within greater constraints. He's not going to be a force multiplier in the same way unless the thing you're copying is something that has a similar or lesser cost and power and a very beneficial effect. Like, for example, I can see people looking at Bastion and saying, I want to play this with Iron Man. But it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do because it requires you to get the Iron Man down on turn 4 and sort of expose it to the world and then Bastion it, which would be very powerful, but it is jumping through a lot of hoops in order to get to that power that is often not going to be realized. I think Bastion, like some of the other copy cards in the current metagame, excels when it's copying cheap stuff. And especially cheap stuff that force multiplies with itself. We talked about Victoria Hand, we talked about Cerebro. It's probably time to talk about the other cheap card that force multiplies with itself, and that is, of course, Invisible Woman First Steps. Because not only are you going to be able to maybe copy an Invisible Woman First Steps with this card, you're also going to maybe be able to copy Athena with this card, or a Sunspot with this card if you are running a Sunspot version of this kind of stuff. And having access to multiple big scaling threats in the same way that you have access to double Invisible Woman does seem plenty powerful for a list like this. This is a pretty minimalistic, teched out list that is not investing super heavily in the combo, but there are going to be draws where you are just going to fully combo off because of what Bastion is enabling you to do. So what do you think about Bastion? I'm pretty compelled by the way he seems to be functioning as a force multiplier on cheap cards that scale with themselves. Is that the kind of thing that you want out of a card in Marvel Snap? Let me know in the comments below. I know this is on the Marvel Snap channel, but I'll still read all of them. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy this preview of Bastion that I was lucky enough to be able to give you, and I want to thank Marvel Snap for allowing me to make a video like this. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I can't wait to do more things like this. As always, I have been KMBest, you have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.